Hey, y'all, and welcome to the second short lecture from Chapter 2 in your textbook. And in this short lecture, we're going to talk about Marx and this notion of what we call ideology. So, for Marx, he was really sort of hell bent on this idea that economics impact sort of the experience of everyday life, right? And so he maintained that the economic structure of a society directly impacts the system of ideas that sort of rule at any particular moment in history. So what he's saying is that ideas, right, the way that we think, are the outcome of economic activity. So economics influences how we think. And when I say economics, I'm talking about economics broadly, right? So the way the entire economy functions affects your notion of reality, right? Your notion of social reality and how things are supposed to be. And when you think about it, I mean, part of the reason that Marx has stuck around so long and is so popular, at least in schools, is that there's a lot of truth to this notion, right? I mean, the way that our economy is put together really does affect the kind of ideas and expectations and thoughts that we have, right? So, for example, you wouldn't, well, an example might be we look at the children of people who are very wealthy and we expect them to inherit their parents' wealth, right? We expect them to be wealthy too. But why should we expect that? Why shouldn't they have to go out and earn it for themselves? Why shouldn't they have to go out and get rich on their own if they want to be rich too, right? The fact that we just naturally assume that families can be rich is a direct result of the way that our economy functions, right? I mean, if I'm rich, I want my kids to be rich too. And so I make that seem natural, right? I want that to seem like the perfectly natural thing to have happen so that people don't even stop and think about it, right? And that's what ideology is all about. Ideology are the ideas that sort of make up your reality, that you don't sit around, and when I say reality, I mean your social reality, right? That make up your social reality that you don't even question, that just seem natural to you, right? Now, over time, people do question many of these ideas, and oftentimes they change, right? Oftentimes they change as a result of the kind of dialectical process we spoke about in the last lecture. But there are a lot of ideas we don't question. So, for example, when my mother was growing up, there were only two really potential career options for women in society. One was teacher, and the other was secretary, right? I guess nurse would be a third one, right? But that was it, and nobody questioned that, right? No one sat around and said, "Well, I really want to be a nuclear physicist," right? Because it wasn't even an option, and it was ideology that that does that, right? It's ideology is that force that limits your understanding, right? And that comes out of the economy for Marx. And so, going with this idea, Marx famously said the ideas of the ruling class are, in every epoch or throughout all time, the ruling ideas, i.e., the class in which the class which is the ruling material force of society is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. So what he's saying here is that the people who are in charge, the people with the money, right, the people with the power, their ideas are the ruling ideas. Their ideas are the powerful ideas. And so, specifically applying it to capitalism, he says the class which has the means of material production at its disposal has control over the same time as the means of mental production. Right? So let me say that again because I paraphrase a little bit. The class which has the means of material production at its disposal, so the people who own the factories, the people that own the organizations, the people that own the stuff that make stuff, has control at the same time over the means of mental production. So what he's saying is if you control the money and the equipment and everything else, then you also kind of control how people think. And that's a powerful idea, right? That's a very powerful idea, and that's why Marx has become so famous over time. So this system of attitudes, beliefs, ideas, perceptions, and values that shape people's reality in society, that's ideology. So according to Marx and many others, the idea here is that ideology just doesn't reflect reality. It shapes reality. And it shapes reality in a way that favors the dominant class, the rich folk, the people in charge. And it works against the interest of the subaltern classes. And subaltern is just a fancy word for the people, the masses, the rest of us, right? In our society, he'd look at it and he'd say it's the ideas of the 1%, right? The super rich that shape reality and work against the rest of us. And so famously, this leads to the idea that ideology represents the imaginary relationship of individuals to the real conditions of existence. So ideology, what he's saying here is that ideology gives us a frame for understanding reality, right? It's imagined. It's all based in ideas. But our relationship to the real conditions of our existence are always imaginary, right? We never really understand reality, right? It's always framed through words or thoughts or senses, right? You never really have a firm grasp on what's real. So at this point, I usually ask you, right, can you provide me some examples of ideology? And since we're not meeting in class, I'll give you a few, right? So ideology works in a lot of ways that you probably don't recognize. One of the ways is just in names, for example, right? Why did I call my son Harry and not Henrietta? Right? There's no hard and fast reality that says that he can't be named Henrietta. But ideology, right, the system of beliefs and values and everything that make up our society dictates that I shouldn't give a boy the name Henrietta because it's a girl's name, right? When my kids were born, I painted their room blue because they were both boys, right? And I didn't paint it pink, and that's ideology working on me because that's just what we've been taught, right? Those are the rules of society. This is a great video with a philosopher by the name of Slavoj Žižek. And Žižek is really kind of an entertaining guy, and he explains in this video how ideology works. And the thing is, you can't really see ideology working, no matter how hard you try, because you're always in ideology. You're always already there, right? And so in a way you can't see the forest for the trees. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about this in our first class meeting. But that's the idea here. And I won't make you watch the video now, but you can if you want. So why do people criticize Marx? What are some of the scholarly criticisms of Marx? Well, the first one is, Marx always said that as a result of this historical dialectic, right, this teleological process, he said that capitalism would fail. And it hasn't yet, right? Lots of communist, purportedly, or lots of countries that have tried communism have failed, but capitalism has not failed completely yet. The next thing that they criticize is the idea that there's too much emphasis on how the economic structure of a society works to determine the rest of it. So, again, for Marx, it's all about the economy. It's all about who controls the means of production, right? And he says that this influences everything from the movies we watch to the books we read to our social practices and so on. And some people say he took it too far. And then there's also the criticism that he didn't really see the changes coming in capitalism. And capitalism has obviously changed a lot since the 19th century, right? So in the United States, for example, we don't make as much stuff as we used to. We're not really in an industrial economy. We're not about making things. We have more of a service-based economy. And so people criticize Marx for not seeing into the future and seeing the ways that capitalism would change, which I think is a little unfair, maybe, but nevertheless, it is a critique. So, some of the most famous people who read Marx and then took up his ideas and tried to make them relevant moving forward, some of the most famous folks were the neo-Marxists of the Frankfurt School in Germany. So they all worked, it wasn't called the Frankfurt School, but most of them worked at a place called the Institute for Social Research, which was in Frankfurt, Germany, of course, and founded in 1923. And many of these folks were Jewish and considered kind of radical intellectuals. And what they tried to do at the Frankfurt School was to revise Marxism to make it better, right? So that it's more applicable moving forward. And so they said, well, there's too much emphasis on economics with Marx, right? And we need to pay more attention to culture and society and the way that it works. And so they had some really famous studies come out of the Frankfurt School, probably the most famous of which was a critique of what was called the culture industry. And in the culture industry essay, the thinkers of the Frankfurt School said, movies, television, right, these things are supposed to be art, but in capitalist society, they've been made into another product, just like anything else coming off an assembly line. And they force feed popular culture to people. And ultimately the people in the masses are just dupes, right? They're just stupid people who watch what they're told to watch and listen to the kind of music that they're told to listen to. They argue that popular culture, again, is just mass-produced, like cars or iPhones, right? And that there's a ruling class that rules from above and says, watch this, right? Talk on this. And then another thing that they do is they create a bunch of false needs to further their own interests. You need the iPhone 12, right? Because your iPhone 10 isn't good enough, right? And that's a false need. We all know that none of us even needs an iPhone, right? I know that for a fact because they didn't have them for a long time when I was alive. But because of capitalism, we create these false needs. Beyond that, they criticize the whole idea of the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment, of course, took place in Europe centuries before the Industrial Revolution. But the Enlightenment valued reason and a scientific approach to solving problems. And a lot of the thinkers from the Frankfurt School said, okay, well, I mean, that's fine, but it's this scientific approach that took us from the assembly line to the concentration camps in Germany, right? You couldn't have had the Holocaust, and Hitler couldn't have killed 6 million Jewish people and 5 million others without Henry Ford's assembly line. Right? It was that model, that industrial model, that allowed him to kill people on such a wide scale. And if we hadn't gone that far, we never would have gotten there. Right? All right, so that's it for this discussion. We'll talk more about the Frankfurt School and the field of cultural studies in the next lecture. Thanks for checking it out.